Hello, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the ADHDads. JJ and I are pretty thrilled this week. We've got a really special guest here. This is Vince Horan, and he is a family therapist. He is a youth minister. He's got a lot of really great knowledge for us regarding marriage today. Really was excited to talk to Vince because I saw a video that he did called The Sacred Crucible of Marriage. Is that right, Vince?
Yes,
the Sacred Crucible of Marriage. And he just had some really great information in there. So I wanted to bring him on and enlighten some of you guys with some of the stuff that we've been talking about over the last week. So welcome, Vince. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your professional life and what got you here today and where your specialty is?
Yes, not a problem. Thank you for having me here. Currently, I'm in a private practice with my wife, Sandra. If anybody's seen the video that we did, it was because we do all of our groups together. We've been in practice since 1991. Previous to that, I was a youth minister. I worked for Catholic Community Services for a number of years. And then I was in the drug and alcohol treatment process, and I worked both inpatient and outpatient. In the inpatient program, I was in the family program. So I did a lot with adult children of alcoholics, family recovery intervention. We had an adolescent treatment program. I'm also a Vietnam veteran, so I've did a lot of work with post-traumatic stress disorder. When Sandra and I first met, both of us had been in previous marriages, and we had, as things began to happen, as you'll hear a little bit later, we both went into our individual counseling to try to address issues from our previous marriages, as well as what led us back into our family of origin trauma, because there were so many things that are unconscious to couples when they get together. But one of the things that we noticed in the counseling when we did our individual group and individual counseling is that there wasn't a lot of support for marriage. It was like, well, if you're unhappy, it's okay to leave. But we had a pretty strong bond together. So what was important to us is we started to seek out trainings so that we could honor our relationship. And then as we got to know some of the people, we did some significant training in marriage and family therapy. So that became something that was very near and dear to us, that a lot of our clients appreciated, that we weren't just in the business of helping people divorce or separate, but that we were helping couples to work through their problems and issues together. And so we have an ongoing couples group that's been going for over 20 years. We're going to do a couples workshop. We haven't done any workshops because of COVID for the last few years because people didn't want to come. But now that things are opening up, we're going to start redoing weekend promotions and groups, workshops. And our first one is going to be a couples workshop the 1st and 2nd of April here at our place here in Tacoma.
And how long have you and Sandra been married now?
In April will be 45 years.
45 years, wow. And how long was your guys' previous marriages?
Mine was 6.5 years, and hers was about 5 or 6 years.
Great. And any kids in that previous marriage, or any kids?
Yes, she had 2 children. When I first met her, they were 1 and 3. And then we had 1 child together. So we have 3 children. They're 49, 47, and 42.
Yeah.
3 grandchildren and 1 great-granddaughter. So.
Well, that's an interesting story, Vince. I'd like to know more about that because I came into my relationship here with my now wife, and she had 3 kids. I had none. I came from a marriage that we were together for 9 years. but we never had any kids together, you know, and I came in, and when I came in, her youngest was 3.5 months old. So I came in pretty new to that situation. So to hear that you came in when Sandra had a 1-year-old, you know, I find those kind of stories intriguing, and, you know, that you guys have lasted so long. That's pretty cool, man.
Yeah, it's an amazing experience because, you know, their dad, who's now deceased, but you know, he wasn't very stable because he had addiction problems. So while they had a bond with him, he was very unstable. So as we grew and developed, there was always a split or a tension. Like when we had our youngest son together, that was ours. But, you know, our two older children had their own bio dad who would come in and out of our lives. So that would create some tension between us because, of course, Sandra was their mom. So she felt a different kind of bond and responsibility for them because of what they'd been through. So that was something we had to do a lot of work around so that we could be consistent and not discount each other or feel the stress and pressure. Now the older children say, well, you're my dad, you know, because we've bonded really well. But there was tension for a while. There was even when the oldest daughter was 15, we had gone to some counseling, and part of the issue that came up for her is that she held on to the fantasy of wanting to be with her biological father. And that so she wanted us to divorce and for Sandra to go back to her biological father. And so it was in that counseling session that she was very clear, that's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. So that helped in a transitional piece to kind of
that's, I think, why I kind of find all of this so fascinating, you know, co-parenting or step-parenting kind of dynamics, because and not to say that, you know, families are easy, you know, in a normal biological setting, they're in no way, but there's an extra set of boundaries and dynamics to navigate with step-parenting dynamics, and, you know, the kind of the rules are a little bit different, you know, so it's definitely a little bit of growing pains and conversations that maybe are out of the norm of some more parenting dynamics, because that was something that we you know, still have to have a lot of open communication about. Of the dynamics are, if our mom and dad get to get back together, and if they do, where's Coley going to live, because they want Coley to still come along too, you know, if mom and dad get back together. Right. So, you know, it's just interesting to have those. And, you know, I remember one of the first time I met the first time I met the kids, and, you know, right after we got done with the handshaking, you know, the little Aubrey, she was 3 years old at the time, looks up at mama and says, is he going to be our new daddy? You know, that was, wow, okay. She's thrown right into the fire with a kind of realness and weight of a relationship with a woman with kids. You know, you had to think about that right away. We had to get into some deep conversations right off the bat, you know. So anyway, it's just cool, man. I'm glad that we can relate on that, you know, stepdad brothers.
I'm curious because, of course, I've not moved into a relationship with somebody who is also a parent. But I'm just really curious, like, what does support in those situations of tension look like? How do we provide the support that can best serve them and the kids, of course, because the kids are very much a part of that emotional component.
Right. A lot of it is the compassion of understanding the dynamic of blended family systems. So it's a way of doing a both and, that we're not trying to turn you against your father or mother, or don't want to try to get into a competition of who's the dad, you know, in this situation. It's more about empathy and understanding that they're going to have their grief. A part of grief that we deal with, we call value confusion. So when they've had the alignment that they've had in the beginning, in the early stages of their life, and then suddenly all of that changes, that we often think, the old paradigm was that, well, kids won't remember, so we don't have to pay attention to them. It's the adults that need to do their grieving process. But, kids are kind of the forgotten beings of divorce, and they have their own grieving that needs to be done. And part of it is the value confusion of, so not trying to triangulate mom and dad or the other dad in a way to try to do power plays, because their process developmentally as they grow older is to separate, to test their power, to manipulate, to try to control. So as they're doing their natural dynamics, it's really essential that the parents have the knowledge of what their role is as parenting, to have clear boundaries, but at the same time be affirming to them and really compassionate to all the grief that they're feeling, because it is different. And so the younger kids will kind of do that thing that you said, Colton, about, "Are you my new daddy?" kind of thing. But as time goes on, there's still lots of questions that they will have. And the key is, are the parents prepared to respond or answer the question?
Yeah. What did family life look like for you? Did you or Sandra have any step parents, or what did family dynamic look like?
No, we both came from families that, well, for Sandra, it was different than me, because my parents stayed together for 55 years. They lived until they died together, but we had many family issues, alcoholism and abuse and all of that kind of stuff. For Sandra, her dad died when she was 7. So she never knew her dad. And her mom was a severe alcoholic. So she had all kinds of different experiences for her, because her mom had other men in and out of her life and struggles with her own recovery. So there were lots of men that came into her life that she never bonded with at all, because they were pretty dysfunctional people, because of the kind of people that her mother would attract. So her grief around dealing with men and bonding as a kid, she was the youngest of 5. I'm the 4th of 6. So our mutual family dynamics were very different.
And what about you and your childhood? What are some lessons that you've learned throughout that experience, or that maybe your parents taught to you, whether intentional or not intentional, that you've either implied in your parenting or kind of gone the opposite route and gone against what there was? What were the lessons that you kind of took from your experience growing up with your dynamic at home and as a kid?
Yeah, there's the outward image that is presented of we're the Horan family, and we're 6 kids and mom and dad, and we stay together. But the reality was, in part of the drug and alcohol treatment, we call the no talk rule. When feelings were expressed, they were usually anger, and it was violent. So we stuffed feelings. There was not a lot of demonstration of intimacy or closeness. So as a kid, I made up a story in my head that we're a family that loved each other so much that we never had to say it or never had to show it. And of course, when I got into my adolescence and young adulthood and started pursuing relationships, I had no clue how to be intimate, how to communicate, how to deal with feelings, because as a veteran, I was afraid of my anger, because of the experience that I had in the military. And then it was not cool because of the stereotype of being a male 50 years ago. So if I had grief, I would often sit in my room by myself and play depressing music. Or once, when my older brother left, I was so sad that he was leaving, because I was really more bonded to him than my dad, because my dad was kind of a non-entity in my family. But instead of feeling sad, I bit through my tongue to try to keep myself from showing the grief, because it was seen as a sign of weakness, and it was often judged harshly. So I did everything I did to try to control my feelings. But that meant I never learned how to deal with feelings. And that's what became problematic, as I moved into relationships, is that I was in my head, I was smart, and I knew I was smart. So I had the idea of what was supposed to happen. But when it came down to, because the reality of marriage is that it's two individuals who come together in the most humanly intimate way that get exposed to their limitations and their imperfections. Everything gets exposed in the marriage relationship.
Was there a moment in your younger self life where you realized that this was maybe a problem for you, or the way that you grew up or those communication tactics weren't serving you, and that you needed to make a change or start exploring other ways?
Yeah, there were several moments. One of them was when I went to Vietnam and came back, and then I went to college, and that's where I met my first wife. And for me, intimacy as a young man was pretty much sex. I'd pursue romance and sexual attraction. Then on my honeymoon, we were somewhere on the beach in California, and my wife turned to me and said, I don't really want to be sexual with you. And I said, why? I'm shocked. Our honeymoon. And she said, well, and because we'd been very sexual up to our marriage. And she said, well, that was the only way I knew I could get you to marry me. So that was a crusher. And then, of course, growing up Catholic, it was that till death do you part. So even though I was depressed and miserable and did not have healthy communication skills, and she had basically taken away the only way I knew how to be connected, I was just in a lot of pain and depression and suffering, and didn't know where to go. And eventually, the way that I pushed it was in a very passive-aggressive acting out. So I had affairs as a way to get out of the relationship. Then, as I started dating again, kind of the second thing that happened is that I realized that I didn't know how to be connected to a woman without having sex be a part of it. So I chose a period of abstinence where I was simply trying to find out who women were and if they had any interest in me or I had any interest in them, besides having an agenda of where it's going to go. That was fascinating and mind-blowing to me, because what happened was when I took that off the table, the pursuit of that, women became very open and we had conversation, and it was fascinating. So it was amazing to me to recognize that they liked me for more than just being, a young stud who was wanting to pursue them, that they liked me for my mind and my heart, and we would have conversation. And that's where I first began to learn the concept of intimacy.
I can relate to this story quite a bit, Vince. A lot of the words that you're using here sounds like you're describing a lot of my life, and just the sense of how my family operated. And I think anger was my family's love language. Again, there wasn't a lot of communication unless it was at a raised volume. So we didn't talk a lot about a lot of things that connected us intimately or existentially, or, in any of a deeper way like that. So same as you, when I started growing up in my 20s and got some independence, that physical intimacy was a very important driving factor in my life. And I thought that my displays of anger or loud noise was, well, this is how you show love. This is how my family showed love. What do you mean? Don't you see the love in here? And it took a lot of reflection work and these conversations and vulnerability and looking at it a different way. And, I even had such an attraction to that intimacy aspect, or that physical attraction, that physical intimacy, so much that, I even ventured into an open marriage into my last relationships in hopes to save that, to reconnect on that physical intimacy level. So again, just everything that you're saying here, I can fall into understanding the psyche of that so much. So thank you for being vulnerable and sharing a lot of that with me. It hits me for sure.
Not a problem. I think one of the things that is important is that I've learned through therapy over the years is that when we experience terror as trauma or anger as violence, then we become shut down to try to avoid, instead of learning that feelings are normal and they're really your inner guidance mechanism of what works and what doesn't work in your life. But I had no training of how to deal with feelings in a healthy manner. So that's why in our therapeutic process and in our couples work, we really help couples try to not make feelings emergencies, because in their history, lots of times they felt it was an emergency and it was a black and white moment. It's a do or die moment, instead of saying, no, it's just your body and your emotions trying to tell you something's not working. And if we could stop dramatizing it and then give them structure to how to communicate it in a way that shows empathy, compassion, and respect to your partner, then couples really learn a lot of ways to go through conflict without being terrified.
Vince, I'm really curious then. I had my traumas, have traumas that I still carry with me today. And I had a similar experience about the idea of, actually addressing those traumas and addressing the issues that were taking place in cycles, in my life. I got comfortable in the discomfort, not tackling a subject, not going further into the conflict, but instead avoiding it or, stuffing it down. And then, of course, it comes back and attacks again. And I had this terrible approach to it, like suggesting that running away from it is going to make it better, when in reality, I hadn't learned anything. That was a big issue in my life as well. And I guess one thing that I heard a few times here is, the idea of normal, where it's normal to be masculine and pretend we don't feel anger or we don't feel sadness and stuff. And that gets us in trouble in our relationships.
Right.
What does it take? What can somebody listening to this who might be struggling in those poor cycles do to recognize, hey, I do need to find some new sets of tools. I want to get out of this bad habit of kind of hurting myself and hurting others in relationship. What does it take to say, okay, I do need to make an effort to take another step here? And what does that step look like? Is that counseling? Is it, reading a self-help book? What do you think would be good?
Yeah, mostly it's counseling. See, when couples come in and we do assessment work with them, we spend time getting to know a little bit of our history, because psychology tells us that even though we may think that we don't ever want to repeat the patterns of our parents, unless there is conscious and awareness, we repeat 90% of our parents' attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. We believe in a process called cellular memory. In other words, 95% of your brain is subconscious. It's like a computer that's running a program, and a lot of the programming we carry inside is how we saw things modeled for us through our family of origin. The way that dads deal with things, the way that moms deal with things, the way that dads deal with mom, the interactions with our siblings, what happens when crisis or conflict comes up. All of that is programmed. So when we're at the limit of our knowledge of what to do, we unconsciously go back and replay the tapes of the old program. And then we find ourselves recycling. So when we do assessments with couples, we often will look at when they start to express the level of feeling, is the feeling germane to the situation that they're presenting? If the feeling is bigger than the situation they're presenting, then we often say, okay, this sounds like it's more than just what's happening between the two of you. Are you willing to do some individual therapy to kind of look at and see if you can carry through and address some of this issue, so it's not, you're not trying to resolve all of those years of old family trauma in a present day relationship, because your partner can't deal with it. It's not about them. They may trigger the situation, but they can't solve whatever the historical trauma is from the past. So we try to separate out, in the idea of the program that we did, Sandra and I, about the Sacred Crucible, is that we want to honor this concept of marriage or coupleship, but that what this coupleship is capable of is only as good as the self-awareness, the maturity, and the confidence of each of the individual partners. And that's why marriage brings up so much, because marriage will always, when you're living with somebody 24/7 and taking on all the responsibility, it will bring up everything that's unfinished within you.
You know, that's interesting that you bring it there in that self-awareness aspect, because one of the messages that I got from your video is that kind of aspect of self-ownership, extreme ownership, because I think a lot of the traps that married couples fall into when they start going to therapy is, how can I get this therapist to agree with me? And, how can we get this session to, I can convince this therapist that all of these things, if she could just fix or just do differently, it would make our life so much better.
Right.
And what I love about your message here is like and the question I want to ask you is how do you get somebody to take a step back and own that self-awareness piece, because again, I feel so many people go in with that, if they just do this, then I could be happier. So how do you kind of stop that in its tracks and say, no, you got to look in the mirror and take ownership over your own part in that?
Right.
And I just want to add to that, Colton, because this is a prime example of how I brought my past trauma and, the modeling of my parents to my relationship, which, ultimately ended in divorce. I take a lot of ownership for that. One thing that I did, and and she did this too, so we kind of had our traumas battling each other, is I had a parent who essentially would always look for teachable moments with me, and would suggest that I have a lot of work to do in figuring out the world, and my parent always had the answers. So when I got to being a teenager, I somewhat rebelled against the idea, like my parent has it all figured out, and I wanted to be right all the time. So we still have these back and forths with my parent, and I do, where I think I'm right, she thinks she's right, and then when I took that to my marriage, it amplified in my space. So then she was seeking out a counselor, and I had this weird attitude that I didn't need counseling because she was the one with the diagnosis. And that was just ignorance and unfortunately very damaging to our relationship, that I had brought this trauma of being right in air quotes, of course, because I have failed time and again, and I'm very wrong a lot of the time.
Yeah, that's beautiful. A couple of points. One, it's usually one or the other in a coupleship who initiates, we've got a problem. Okay. And so they say, so we can't figure it out, so let's go to counseling. When they get to me, usually is fairly significant because it's been going on for a while. So one of the things that I do with couples is to say, I'm a process observer. There's two parts to every relationship. One is your story, and that's yours, and I'm not going to be in judgment of either one of your stories. But the second is the process. In other words, it's not just what happened, but 90% of conflict in a relationship is how the conflict is addressed. So we focus more on how are you communicating with each other, where are the breakdowns in your process of mutual respect and shared understanding. Do you have the tools on one hand, or do you have the desire? And there are many times when couples get to loggerheads and they come in here and they're both just mad as hell and they want the other person to change. What I will go to them and say, I want each of you to go away this week and think about what you are doing, what you recognize that you are doing that is creating to the dysfunction of your relationship. I don't want you to talk about the other person. Your feelings are for you. They're not for the other person. Feelings are about hopes and expectations or interpretations of what we experience. So you need to figure out your part. Your partner needs to go away and figure out their part. And if you have a bond enough that you really want to work at this, I want you to come back next week simply owning what you recognize that you're doing that's keeping your relationship stuck and unable to break through the communication process. Because, see, most couples, when they come in with a lot of judgment and they want a quick solution. And we always say, couples counseling is not a quick solution. It's simply an indicator that there are some holes in your skill sets and some lack of knowledge of how to show respect for one another. And if you're not willing to do that, then you don't have a chance. Every story can be a wonderful, incredible learning experience for the couple. And if they can get through it, it will create a bond of trust that is bigger than anything they could have known, because you want trust in the beginning, but you don't know what you're getting into. So as conflicts come, the mutual respect and the way you process things will build a trust, because we're able to address our differences and come out of it feeling really heard and feeling understood, and that we're patient so we don't go to problem solving too fast, where somebody feels discounted. We like to call it, our goal is a win-win. There's compromise, so each of you is going to compromise to some degree, but if you understand it and you're willing to do it, then there's no resentment that builds up in the core or underneath it, because you did it together and you did it in a respectful way. And that's the biggest challenge of couples therapy, is slowing people down, having them be responsible for their own feelings, and be patient.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to take responsibility or to grow from something if you're not ready to take responsibility for it yet, right?
Right.
I mean, if you're not willing to kind of take that inventory of yourself and really dive into what are the things that I may be contributing to in this dynamic here, right. Then how are we supposed to grow? How are you supposed to realize that, or how are you supposed to compromise? And I'm curious, because you talked about some addiction and behavioral stuff there, and where my mind is going to is part of the 12-step program of kind of creating that fearless and moral inventory of yourself.
Yeah.
and all the things that you've done wrong, and, you know, sharing that with somebody else. And I'm going on 6 years sober here in my life. So I've gone through that process. Thank you. Thank you. And going through that process, I feel, was a very important change in my life to really go into that. I don't think that I ever did that before I went through that step in the 12 steps. And, you know, for anyone out there, I'm going to plug this book because I love plugging this book. One day we're going to get Russell Brand on this show, JJ. Russell Brand does a book. It's called Recovery, and it talks about, you know, addiction, and we're all addicted to something. We're all addicts. You know,
right,
some of us, it may be something more apparent like sex or drugs or alcohol, or but some of it is a little bit less apparent, like your phone or work or, you know, bad behaviors. Sure. And this book is, you know, talking about using the 12-step program to kind of call attention to your addictions and how to kind of work through it. And I think that this is really relevant to what we're talking to here, because I think that behavior is also an addiction, right? And sometimes we're not even aware of these behaviors. We've grown up and been programmed in the subconscious way by our parents, or, you know, we're not ready to look at those behaviors. So I think doing this 12-step work and the step that we're talking about and that inventory of oneself just is so vital into understanding oneself and the addiction to that behavior and how to grow from that behavior.
Yeah, that's really good. You know, and all the years that I worked in addictions field, what I was aware of is if one or another party was active in an addiction, then their maturity level stopped when they started their addiction. They may have gotten smarter and wiser, but in terms of dealing with inner emotions, thinking of it this way is that addiction is a survival mechanism. See, the goal when we want to create love or intimacy is we want to mature and thrive. Well, thriving is a completely different set of skills than surviving. And addiction is all about surviving. So I would always say to couples if they come in and one was in an active addiction, I say to the addicted person, are you willing to do some form of recovery, whether it's 12 steps, treatment, or, you know, find a way to address your addiction? And I would often refer the other person to codependency treatment. So some form of Al-Anon or Nar-Anon or Codependence Anonymous, because they needed to understand that what we called in our video the hostile dependent part of a relationship, many couples get stuck there because they have unconscious habitual survival patterns that keep them recycling the same trauma. The situation changes, but the trauma and the way to deal with the trauma recycles over and over again. So we try to interrupt that piece. And we'll say to people before we bring them into group, you have to have a solid sobriety before we open deep emotional issues. Because if you don't have sobriety, you're just going to re-traumatize yourself.
And that's a really interesting piece that you said there about how the kind of development or maturity stops with addiction. This is, I feel like you just got into my head here over the last few weeks, Vince. I've been rolling around this thought without the ability to really necessarily articulate it, but I feel that that's again, thinking about my own addiction and journey of sobriety here. You know, I don't know when we'll release this episode, but I'm about 2 days away actually from my 6-year anniversary. February 28th will be 6 years, man.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking about it, you know, I just kind of been thinking about the whole journey and the process. And that's something that kind of just rattled around in my mind is when you picked up alcohol and weed and started looking for escapism is when you really deprived myself of experiencing fully to understand, grow, and mature and learn from, you know, because if you're always searching for escape or if you're always looking to detach yourself from a situation, then how can you ever fully be present to get all of the emotions that come with that? And how can you be present to ask the right kind of questions? So, I mean, you just kind of hit it right on the head for me. So thank you for completing that incomplete sentence in my head over the last couple of weeks. That was good stuff, Vince.
Yeah, you're welcome. That was great.
I do have a question regarding, you know, when couples come together, you know, and it typically, of course, you see a lot of people are in that desperate point in their relationship. When they do start putting in the work and they have the drive to, repair this thing that they have. You also mentioned, earlier the 90% that kind of comes back. We've been modeled this behavior, and we're therefore going to model this behavior. And then it becomes a destructive pattern in our relationship. When we break that pattern, what does it take for us to not fall into those, decades of conditioning to then, return back to that defensiveness and that person who's working in their traumas rather than working towards solutions?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. When we're young, we learn to adapt to the environment. So we stop focusing inwardly. And because of the family no talk rule, we're not allowed to experience feelings and see them supported and addressed from beginning to end. So we move to our compulsions or our obsessions as a way to try to solve and figure out, how do I present an image that's less abusive or with less fear of abandonment? And we play that out in marriage. So the number one thing that I find is that underneath all of the addiction processes is unfinished grief. You have to feel it in order to heal it. So to be able to move beyond, you have to learn how to get support as you move through your grief and feelings, because the grief process from denial, anger, the bargaining state where the mental confusion is, depression is a piece of grief, the losses that we experience. Underneath that, beyond that, is acceptance, forgiveness, and letting go. So only when we acknowledge the level of grief, and we're able to, especially if it's family of origin trauma, recognize it's a brilliant strategy for children to say, well, this unhappiness and this chaos must be because of me. So kids take it on because at least it gives them an illusion of hope. If I can adapt myself, maybe they won't be so angry, or I won't be so ignored. Of course, it's a mistaken belief because it isn't really about them. It's about the limitations that their parents or caregivers have. And so once you do the grief to validate the childhood experience, yeah, this was rough, but it wasn't my fault. It was because they didn't know or have the skill set or the consciousness. When we have that awareness and we are validated in our feeling, then we can get to acceptance and be able to separate from those old things. That gives us freedom to move forward, to decide our own destiny, our own values, our own priorities, and then educate ourselves to learn a new set of skills. Can I share one circumstance that was a big one for me? Is that okay?
Please. I'd love to hear.
Yeah, well, growing up, my brothers, because I was my first three brothers were like 4 years apart. Then there was World War II, and I was the post-war baby. My brothers would always say, Mom loved me best, because I came after all that long period of time. But I would always say, because Mom's way of parenting was very critical. She was always worried, but projected it at me. What did you do wrong? Every time I had a relationship with a girlfriend break up, first thing was, what did you do to make her go away? It was always my fault. So I would say to my brothers, if that's what love is, I don't want it. So even as I was growing and developing, I remember being furious because I wanted her approval, and I kept going back and say, well, I've accomplished this. And then she would find the flaw in it, and I would get so angry. And I had a conversation with one of my older brothers once, and he said to me, it's interesting that you're angry with Mom for not supporting you or not understanding you. What I hear is that you don't accept her for who she is. And when he said that, all my anger disappeared, because I realized my anger was I was holding on to a fantasy that she was capable of supporting a new direction in life. And I was the first one to wear beetle boots and have fro hair and grow, she would always come up and grab my beard. You'd be so handsome, because we were a military family, so she expected crew cuts. And so I always got criticized for being different. And when my brother said that to me, it's like, oh yeah, if I want support for how I'm growing and changing, I can't let her be that source. I have to let go of my attachment to seeking out her approval. That made a whole difference in my world. That makes sense and relevant to the story, but
isn't it funny, the things that we resent our parents for are usually the things that we live out and play out in our own lives that we're just not aware of yet?
Yep, that's part of the 90%. Yep.
Well, I would love to follow that up a little bit. We talked about blended families and single parenthood as a situation I'm in. I think a lot of kids in those situations where they do feel powerless over the challenge that their parents experienced. I think a lot of kids therefore become that much more dependent for support and acceptance from their parents. And it's really difficult to fully believe that they're receiving the love that they so desperately want, because they know they're going to mom's house, they're going to dad's house, and they don't have their own house. How do we help support them to show them, that this love is here, even though it looks a little different than, say, your friends who have a family that's together, the parents are together.
Right. I'm going to tell you a story that happened with our son. When he was getting into adolescence, he was getting into a lot of trouble. And we would always get calls from the school counselors and stuff. So we sat him down one time and said, "What's going on with you, Jason? Why are you acting out the ways that you're acting out?" And he finally broke down and he says, "I don't have a dad who loves me." And I was just heartbroken. What he didn't know, and we sat down and told him, is that early on in our marriage, I wanted to adopt him so that he would be my son. But his dad didn't want to give him up. So, but we discussed that as adults, but we never let him know that he was loved so much by both of us and that we both wanted to be his dad. He lived in the fear of, I don't have anybody. I don't have a dad. Nobody knows or cares about me. So I think that's the thing when I said something earlier about children are the lost individuals of divorce and separation, that they need to be communicated with and listened to for their grief and feeling, and understand what's the story that they have going on inside of their own minds, so that they can be witnessed and supported going through their grief process. It's not just the adults that need support, it's the kids also that need support.
I feel like this is such an easy trap for families to fall into, whether it be from communication with parents to children or from spouse to spouse.
Exactly.
My wife and I just had a personal experience with this a couple days ago where we got into an argument, a fight, and we were going back and forth, with it, trying to figure out and listen to each other. What are you trying to say? What do you, I don't understand. The words you're using aren't resonating with me. They're triggering me, it was kind of one of those. And it was kind of a humbling moment at the end of that, because we got to a place where we both kind of ended up just cuddling and laughing together, because we realized that we had just wasted the last 6 hours trying to say the exact same thing to one another. It's like, but we couldn't slow down long enough to hear one another in a way without taking offense. Right. But in the end of that, it was this laughable moment where it was like, if we had just listened, this was so stupid, And again, like you're saying, I think it's just such an easy trap to fall into. So many of us have the thing that we're thinking that we want to defend or that we want to hear, and it's a lot of the times not even the thing. If we just slow down to be able to ask the right questions or to be curious rather than accusing, I think would get us a lot further,
It was so helpful for us when we took, and if you ever heard of the Myers-Briggs, the Jungian psychological types, where we realized the difference between extroversion and introversion, and she's a thinker, I'm a feeler, because couples have experiences and have feelings based on the interpretation of their experiences. So they could be in the same situation, both interpret it differently. And when I say to them, you're both right from your point of view. The problem in the coupleship is that you are missing each other with your interpretation, and then you get into the conflict, well, who's right or who's wrong, instead of saying, no, it's just different. That's what I say to couples right up front. Your conflicts are mostly because you have different personality styles. You come from a different family history style. It takes time to be patient and learn those things so that you see not everything that feels like a conflict is because somebody did something wrong. It's more about just simply, we don't know how to navigate our differences in our personality style. And when you get that information and education, it helps you to just take a deep breath and relax and say, okay, I guess we need to learn how our different love languages, if you want to use that concept.
How might we kind of tick away at that? We talked about that that self-acceptance and that extreme ownership piece and knowing thyself, is that kind of a step in the right direction of slowing the process down in communication to be able to hear your spouse?
Absolutely. And one of the key words that I always say is be humble. See, in other words, we have strengths in our personality style, ways that we process, which is probably what attracted us to our partner in the first place. And they have a different strength. But oftentimes their strength is our weakness. So if you could be humble enough to be able to say, I never looked at it that way. That's an interesting perspective. And they're not bad for the way they do it, or they may struggle with our way. One of the things we did in the program that we did was Sandra talking about she's a real introvert who thinks things out in her head before she says things, where I'm an out loud talker. I can just process things for hours. But in my mind, I'm not attached to the outcome because I'm listening to myself talk and say, well, that was bullshit. It was interesting logic that I was trying out, but it doesn't really fit. But for her, when she thinks a long time about something, she has a lot of attachment to it. So if in my extrovert way, I just call bullshit on some things she's saying, she's offended because I'm disrespecting the effort that she has put in to get to wherever she's gotten to. See, so those are the subtle nuances of couples communication and developing a much more conscious ability to say, I often say when people first get together, we're kind of the blind leading the blind trying to figure this thing out. And so we're going to run over each other all the time. But neither one of us are bad. We're just finding out where the holes are in our development.
Again, Vince, I feel like you're describing this disagreement that I just had with my wife here. Because I'm that extrovert, I got to talk it out in the moment, out loud, as it's coming into my head in order to process it. And my wife, she gets that. Why would you say that? That doesn't sound fully fleshed out yet. That's offensive that you would even say that at this point, And she, to me, she always says the right thing, right? Just never when I want her to. I have to wait for her to come around and do it in her own damn time. But she always says the right thing and gives me what I need and says the thing that I want to hear, but I just want it now, and out loud, where she's got to take, 24 or 48 hours to process it. Right. And like I heard you talk about with Sandra in that video, she's, when she does talk to you, she's thought about what she wants to say, how she wants to say it, and how she wants to present it to you. Right. Where I'm that opposite. I gotta improv it live, live performance for you. And so that's how we figure it out. Right. So, I think, again, not only knowing yourself in these dynamics, but your partner and how they respond to certain information or certain tones is vitally important to this process, and having the patience, and I've learned in this marriage that, if we're going to get anywhere, my wife is always right. And I don't say that in a submissive way or in a way of stereotyping that you would think that normally, happy wife, happy life, you just got to roll over and just let her have the way. But I say it in the way of, okay, look, if we're going to get anywhere in this conversation, if we're going to make any progress, and if we're going to grow from this, I have to look at it as, okay, she's right. Now let me try to understand why she's right, how she's right. I have to take that mentality to understand it, because if I just go, no, she's wrong, and I'm not going to listen now because I know I'm right and she's wrong, so nothing that she says is going to convince me, we're going to get nowhere. So I kind of have to let the guard down, let the defenses down a little bit, and say, okay, for the time being, I may disagree with her being right, but I have to kind of tackle it in a mindset of, okay, she's right. She's absolutely right. I just have to understand why she's right.
Well, and that's what we say. The concept of the sacred crucible is there has to be a mutual respect and show a desire to get outside of my head, my way of processing, to understand the person's thinking. Understanding them doesn't mean agreeing with them. It just means I value you enough to try to understand how you see whatever the situation is. Then if we can have respect for each other's differences, then it becomes easier to move toward problem solving, brainstorming, compromise. Because we're not against each other. We're sitting together facing our growthing opportunity. And that when couples can get that, then they're not so scared when conflict happens and don't go immediately into their defenses.
I guess what I learned here, Colton, is that your anxious style is wrong and her avoidant style is right. Is that what I'm hearing?
Either way, you guys are getting it. You're picking it up.
What I just wanted to acknowledge is, like, I've heard, instead of introvert, extrovert, I've heard, the attachment styles, anxious and avoidant. Those both sound like they're both flawed in their own way in terms of, the way conversation can break down. But I like what you talked about. The two of you talked about, Colton's example of coming together and building trust after, maybe having some time apart, or hashing it out and then eventually getting to the best outcome. And then, Vince, what I really appreciated too is that your acknowledgement, even though you have a different in the moment approach to conflict resolution, you acknowledge, like, that's not going to get through to this person who very much needs this time to breathe and come back with some level of confidence in who they are. But, even still, like, I could see a situation where we both separated and now I have my own confidence in my point of view. She has confidence in her point of view, and those points of view don't align completely. But then, like, as you said, it's not just simply that point of separating and coming together, but also listening, that I think is the value that I've heard from this conversation. So I really appreciate, both of you for kind of coming to that together in your own way. It was remarkable to witness.
Yeah, cool. Now remember that, trauma response, we talk about survival as fight, flight, or freeze. So some people are fighters and some people get frozen or they run. So they're both survival mechanisms. Doesn't make one right. One who likes to fight may be overpowering to one who pulls back or goes inside. But none of that is functional in terms of seeking to thrive in increasing the intimacy of the relationship. When you can understand, again, the way you've defended yourself can be very different, and it's very different, but neither one of them is wrong or right. They're survival mechanisms. So how do we get beyond that so we can learn to thrive and understand? And that's the beauty of the sacredness of a committed relationship, is learning how to grow our skills.
There was something that you said earlier. I just want to touch base before we kind of wrap things up here. It was you need to feel it to heal it piece.
Yeah.
I think that that's really important for these communication hiccups that we're talking about, because I think a lot of people want to avoid the feeling part of it. You know, they just want to heal it. They say, I don't like feeling that, so I must heal it so I don't feel it. And I think that it's really important to kind of sit with ourselves a little bit before responding, to really kind of make sure that all the right questions have been asked as far as diving deeper into that feeling, right. Not only with yourself, but I think the empathy piece of understanding your partner's feelings is really important too. Because a lot of the time we want to just dismiss our spouse's feelings to defend ours, right. You know, and I think that you got to feel it to heal it is really important for you and your partner before you go trying to deal it out and make things worse. So I really liked that you said that. And I think that, you know, that's my biggest takeaway from here. I think that if I had to boil everything down that we're talking about here, it's, you know, really healthy communication can go really, really far if we can just sit and feel it and heal it, you know? Yeah. So that was really great, Vince. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on here and all the information that you shared with us. It's been a really great pleasure.
My pleasure.
I wanted to ask one more question. You know, you have workshops coming up, as you mentioned. And then we've talked about therapy and couples counseling. That had me thinking, what would be your recommendation for a couple who's trying to, you know, maintain a healthy relationship, or is feeling some level of conflict where they believe, hey, I need maybe a neutral party involved here? Is there like a definable like moment in the process of relationship that people should seek out counseling? Because of course, you know, the obvious time that a lot of people seek out help is when they're desperate.
Right. So when, you know, in the normal developmental cycle of relationship, in the romantic phase, we're so focused on the possibility of we. That's where the intensity and the romance and the sex and all of the good stuff happens. And that's important because it creates a bond. But then there's a point where we stop and say, well, wait a minute, what about me? Because I gave up a lot of things that I like to do. And if it's not clearly communicated, one person will stay in the enmesh stage and the other will try to individuate. And that often creates tension in a relationship. If you don't know how to talk about that, then there are workshops available, or seeking a couples counselor who understands the developmental process of relationship to help you normalize and not go into crisis mode. That's where people get stuck. And because couples don't allow themselves to do that, it usually takes a much more dramatic thing like abuse, or, you know, a DUI, or violence, or an affair or something like that, that kind of shakes the thing. It's like, we can't deny that we've got an issue here that needs to be addressed. But then it's hard to process through whatever the traumatic event was to even build that, and then go back and say, well, we need some skills to understand what because the goal in having this sacred crucible is that we both feel so good about it, that the relationship supports our independence. So we're interdependent in being with each other, but we want to support each other in our continued growth. And part of how you keep kind of attraction and intimacy growing is when you see your partner expanding with joy in whatever their talent or gifts are, or things that they do, that makes you say, wow, she's really hot. I just love seeing her when she's doing this stuff. And because the romantic thing of just the idea of when are we going to get sexual, that wears off really quick. So it's more about how do we support each other's individual, so we admire each other's ability to be in the world, whether it's the way they parent, the way they go out and do their job, their creativity, their other abilities that they have. Nurture that in the relationship will help the long-term sustainability of keeping the passion going.
Before we go, Vince, I want to dive a little bit deeper into the codependence, interdependence aspect of it, because you had mentioned codependence earlier, and now we're kind of talking about interdependence. So would you kind of clarify that for the listeners and what you mean and kind of the benefits or disadvantages of one or the other?
Yeah, when we are codependent, what codependency means is that I am dependent upon you to give me value in life. So if I'm dependent upon you giving me value in life, but you're striving for individual independence because you're just trying to bring back things, often the codependent will feel threatened and have a fear of abandonment come up and will do everything to try to sabotage the independency. See, so interdependence means, well, that stage of relationship when you have that enmeshment is called hostile dependency. It's kind of like, I love you, but you drive me crazy. You're my partner in life, but I can't stand hanging around you when you do these other kind of things. When you're in that stuck hostile dependent stage, it's all drama and it's all intensity. And a lot of couples settle for that, and they confuse it for love. But it's not. It's dysfunction. Interdependence means we count on each other, but we're consciously negotiating that our relationship is evolving every day. So we need to both show up and then openly communicate and negotiate where we want to go as a couple. That's what interdependence means, is I respect you as one of my best friends. I appreciate your opinions, your feedback, your way of dealing with things. And I love that you're willing to support me, even though you don't understand why I want to do certain things, that you support me in pursuing those things. One of the things
I really like that, Vince, because it's this concept of like, because we hear dependency and you kind of put like a negative connotation on that, right? Yeah. But I think also it's kind of human nature for us as humans to want to be dependent on one another, to want to be a part of a system, a tribe, right, a community, right? And to feel like somebody has your back and that you're supported, Right. And I think that that's just basic instinctual level existentialism, right? Right. So, I like this idea of clarifying the codependency and interdependency and how like dependency is a part of a healthy relationship. Sure. If you're negotiating, communicating about it and talking about it and reevaluating it in healthy ways. But I think what the trap and the detriment to a lot of couples is when you stop communicating about that and it becomes an expectation or a resentment or something that is not communicated about that you think is going to happen that you never talk about.
Yeah, human beings are social beings. We need community. We need to know that we belong. So again, it's how you choose to connect with each other. It's not an obligation. It's a choice. When you learn to thrive, then you have choices. So when you make those commitments, whether it's a commitment to fidelity or a commitment to marriage, that you're making them out of choice, not out of obligation.
Really great stuff here, Vince. Thank you so much again for coming on, sharing your time and your experience. Not to worry, guys. We will have all this information in the show notes, from Vince's Sacred Crucible of Marriage video to some of the books that we've talked about, and a link to Vince and Sandra's workshop. If you're in the Tacoma, Washington area and want to get a little bit more of this juice to help your marriage, we will put that in the show notes for you too. So, JJ, do you have any other questions or anything you want to ask Vince before we let him go here?
No, I appreciate your time, Vince. And I just wanted to say if there's anything, that you'd like to tell people about where they can find you, or any other information, even if they are not in your area, is there something that you would like to share?
Yeah, well, our email address is vincehoran@comcast.net. Or they can call our office phone. It's 253-536-9161. That's where all of our messages for clients for information. Also, to let people know that we do, kind of came out of COVID, but we do a lot of therapy on Zoom. So we can support people through Zoom calls. I have clients in North Carolina and New Zealand and California, and also all over the place. So that's been one of the benefits. Not as good as face-to-face, but it's a way to get support. So.
Well, one of the things I love about this show is I feel like we just got a free therapy session with you here, JJ and I. So cool. I love having people like yourself on to share this knowledge. And, I'm glad that you do the Zoom calls, because I think a lot of listeners can get a lot of benefit from hearing you talk more. So thank you again for all that information and sharing your time. JJ, you came off mute. You got anything to say before we give the outro?
I'm all set. Thank you again.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for listening, guys. And hope to have you back next time. Please make sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment. We always love hearing from you. And check out our new homepage. Thanks to Sir JJ here, designed it. Great job. www.theadhdads.com. So thank you again, Vince. And thank you, listeners. Everybody, see you next time.